Welcome to this very special edition of Fresh Off the Board. Mostly it's been students of Edbrand at Edbrand who've been featured in our podcast, but today we have someone who's really special. Our guest today is Yuganshi Singh. Yuganshi, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll roll from there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Yuganshi. I used to work at Edbrand. I worked there for almost 2 years, and now I am pursuing my law degree at Delhi University. So that's just a little bit about me.
Yeah, so it's interesting because this is our first podcast that we are doing with someone who used to work with us. And Yuganshi, the first thing that I remember about you was interviewing you for this position at Edbrand, the writing and project mentor associate role. And something that stood out was obviously you sort of had an understanding of international education, slightly maybe more than other candidates, given that you were in a school system, which was an IB curriculum, and then also got to figure out that your parents also have been in education at IB schools across the region in India and South Asia. So that kind of really was one of the big highlights. And as you sort of, learned the ropes, it was just fantastic to see how your contribution sort of made an impact on students. Every conversation and every sort of meeting, there was something that there was a takeaway for each student. So now tell me a little bit, when you think of life after high school, you were at a crossroad. And what were your thoughts in terms of applying to college? And then you finally became a college counselor at Edbrand. So you can reflect it in a much more deeper way, I guess.
I think my thoughts on applying to college was I think like a lot of other people, I found it super daunting at first because just so many options, trying to figure out what you want to study, where you want to study, all of that. And there was like the bigger crossroads, or I guess like, should I stay back in India, or should I, like a lot of people around me, like, should I just kind of go abroad and figure out like what I want to study and like what life after college could be like somewhere outside of India. So that was something that was for me personally super confusing. I had no idea what I should do. But I chose to go to Ashoka, as you know, and that I think turned out to be like a really good decision for me. So yeah, I mean, I also was kind of unsure of what I wanted to study. I had no idea about like liberal arts college versus other types of colleges, what would be the right fit for me. So to be honest, I feel like I just kind of fell into figuring it out. I didn't have a super organized plan to begin with, which I kind of realized a lot later on when I actually started working at Edbrand, because there was like a process to kind of figuring out, what would work best for an individual. So
yeah, so
that was my experience.
One key thing which could be a good takeaway for anyone listening or viewing is that when you make that decision to go abroad versus maybe staying back in India, looking back, maybe at that point you did not do it in a much more scientific way. But if you were to reflect back, what were the ways to size up your preferences for college, and then have some parameters? What advice would you give students as to what are the pros of just staying back in India?
I think with a lot of like places like Ashoka, Jindal, Plaksha, whatever, those kind of schools that are opening up, I think staying back in India now has become like, I think it presents a lot more opportunity than it maybe did like a few years ago. So that I think now I realize was like a big pro in terms of staying back. I think, I mean, obviously like cost, stuff like that. Also, that kind of depends on whether you just look at like as a pro or whatever. And also, I think just the fact that I feel like staying back at that stage was a pro, because I don't feel like it closed any doors for me in a real sense. I still have the option of like, for example, pursuing a master's abroad. So those were the kind of pros for me. And yeah, I really enjoyed my college experience in India.
So when you look at these new colleges, Ashoka, and you've obviously perhaps interacted with students from others like Kriya or a Flame or a Jindal even, there's that campus life, also the interaction with professors, the flexibility in your course choices. Was that something that you found as a what kind of learning did you get at Ashoka which sort of checked those boxes for you?
So again, actually, that's another pro. I think Ashoka in particular, when I went there, it was a really, really small cohort. So the one-on-one interaction you could have with professors, like maybe you couldn't have at a lot of larger universities. And I really enjoyed that because it meant that when you were in classes, a lot of your learning came from conversations, not just kind of absorbing information that was being taught to you. So that's something I really enjoyed. And the same one for campus life, because it was such a small campus and such a small amount of people. It was a pretty tight knit college community, at least for the first couple of years that I was there. Like everybody kind of knew everybody. Um, and I really enjoyed that. It also meant that you could learn a lot like from your seniors as well. It wasn't, I guess, quite as intimidating to go up to somebody because everybody knew everybody. So I think in terms of learnings, it was probably just that I also realized that I work a lot better or learn a lot better in those sort of more intimate settings.
The other thing, which obviously most students who go to liberal arts colleges, let's say progressive liberal arts colleges, would have uh, the kind of spoiled for choice environment, right? Because you can do so much. You can
Yeah.
take on so many classes, course load, and get involved in clubs and societies, and then figure out maybe closer to your second year, third year, or second year for sure, your major perhaps.
Yeah.
So how was that for you? All the independence of living on campus, making those choices, choosing courses, and then choosing your major.
So I think in terms of that, like even though it was a small college, like in that sense, it still gave a lot of choice. Like my first year, I was taking courses from pretty much every discipline without really having to be like, okay, should I pick this or should I absolutely pick this? And then towards my second year, I kind of realized that my literature courses was what I was enjoying the most. So that's what I chose to major in. But even within that, I think there was so much choice in terms of like literature didn't mean you just have to kind of read a bunch of books and analyze them. There was, you could study film with that, you could study history with that, you could even study law with literature, which is where my interest in law actually kind of came out of. So I really enjoyed the way they approach classes there, in that it wasn't strictly limited to one discipline at any point of time.
So looking at a broader subject through various lenses and having experts sort of share their views and sort of even engage in those conversations. So as you progressed, what aspect of literature did you then start moving toward? And then, of course, the ASP, you chose to do the fourth year at
Yeah.
Ashoka. And how did that decision link with what you had studied in the 3 years?
So ASP I chose to do because the course that I just mentioned, the law and literature one, I kind of took towards the end of my third year, and I realized that's something I was really interested in and wanted to explore. That was one of my main motivations to do the fourth year, because it gives you the opportunity to kind of dive deeper into an area of interest that you've figured out in your discipline over the last 3 years. And because you kind of have to write the capstone thesis and everything, it was an opportunity for me to see if this is something I'm truly interested in and what can I do with it. So that was one of my main motivations for doing ASP, and I really enjoyed it because I think it was rigorous in the sense that obviously you are kind of working towards this target throughout the year. You have to produce your thesis at the end of the year. um, but yeah, it gave me a lot of time and kind of opportunity to explore these two disciplines and actually figure out for sure that this is something I probably kind of want to do even after.
It'll be fun to take a deep dive into this aspect of law and literature and figure out what prompted you and what really inspired you. Were there classmates, of course, the professor? What exactly did you read or discuss or write that helped you make that decision?
So there was one class in particular which I think provided a good starting point for that interest, which was the law of desire. And it was basically kind of looking at intersections of law, literature, gender, and sexuality in India. And we read things from kind of across disciplines again. You were reading judgments, but you were also reading novels and reading legal theory as well and gender theory. So I think that was where my kind of interest took off from. And I realized that, throughout literature classes at Ashoka, like professors would love to say that like it teaches you how to think. And I think that's something that approach kind of translated across those two disciplines for me. And yeah, so I spent my ASP then kind of looking at the idea of consent in law and looking at that through again both actual like legal provisions and through literature and kind of theory surrounding literature. So that's what I did in my fourth year. And yeah, I think just this, again, the interdisciplinarity of looking at all of those kinds of sources together, that was a huge motivation for me to kind of look at the two together. Then it was also just, I think what I specifically chose to research in that fourth year was also a major conversation that people around the world were having at that time, especially on college campuses. This idea of consent, how do you interpret it? Is it like, do we define it too restrictively, et cetera, et cetera? So there was a huge conversation around that was happening, and I was interested in exploring that. So that's kind of where my interest took off from.
Great. I think moving a little bit fast forward in terms of considering opportunities to work, and we were so happy to have you for 2 years almost at Edbrand. What is it like for a 22, 23-year-old maybe to sort of make those decisions? And when you're studying literature, when maybe elders at home would say, what's going to happen next? And how would you define your journey in terms of choosing a pre-professional track and sort of learning skills along the way at the jobs that you've done so far?
So thankfully, I didn't have a lot of the pressure at home bit. But I think after 4 years, like, while I knew what I wanted to do, like I knew the broad sphere, I didn't have any of the specifics. So I thought it would be a good time to kind of maybe take a break, work for a couple of years while I figure out what it is that I can actually do with this interest. And I think the opportunity at Edbrand was especially interesting because I still remember when like Shantanu and Avantika and everybody had come to the Ashoka campus. Firstly, it was still to do with writing, which is something that I realized I would be interested in working with. And also the kind of workspace, like the fact that it wasn't like a super like rigid setup in that sense, which I could see like a lot of my peers were kind of going into like very proper corporate lives right out of college. So I think those were some of the things that helped me make that decision. And I think working there again for like 2 years, it gave me a lot of skills that I think are helping me now and will help me like in any workplace that I go to after this degree as well. So it was a huge learning experience in that sense.
Super. So, there are obviously, it's a very people-centric job at Edbrand. And of course, working with the team, working with projects that the team is doing, other than the main task of mentoring and guiding students on their academic writing or college essay writing. So sort of teaching all of that and wearing multiple hats. So when you talk about transferable skills, what do you think was the biggest one or one or two which you value the most?
So I think the first was confidence. I think the fact that it was such a people-centric role and that you were meeting someone new every day, or like the fact that you weren't just meeting them, but also when we worked with students, I think we had to put in a lot in kind of trying to get to know them to figure out what would be the best way to work with them and how we could produce the best kind of work with them. And that gave me a lot of confidence in just interacting with new people. Like again, Ashoka was like a very, I guess, small space in that sense. But this kind of opened that up a lot more for me. And I think that in particular is something that I could pretty much carry over into any job after that. And also with that, I think adaptability, just the fact that you are kind of moving between tasks and maybe like helping a team member with something and then kind of coming back to what you're doing, or even just taking on like external tasks, for example, the workshops that we did or the blog that we started during the pandemic. I feel like that kind of like ability to move between tasks is something I really value and something that I would probably be able to take to other roles as well.
Thanks. I think this should definitely help anyone listening in. So because when you were there, there was of course COVID had just about started when you were about to leave, but there was a very different sense of work while being at the office, whereas working from home, working from anywhere, or in your case, studying from anywhere, studying from home, there's that disconnect. Have you got any thoughts on reflections on what interested you more when life was in person, especially at work?
Yeah, I think it's something that we actually used to talk about a lot, not just with students, but like within the team itself. It was a completely different environment and spirit when you're working like at an office in person. It's a lot easier to kind of just turn around and communicate with the person sitting next to you. So I think like online work or even online like classes now, it's a lot easier to kind of make it impersonal, which is not something that I really enjoy. So I think working in person, like I used to love that kind of setup of just having everybody around, being able to collaborate, which is a lot more difficult online. It's a lot more difficult, I think, also to just kind of get to know people from scratch online.
Thanks for sharing all this. When I first designed this internship idea, and when we first visited Ashoka, it was in my head, it was more like a fellowship where it would be a continuation of a safe space for young college graduates to sort of contribute with their skills and newfound knowledge, let's just say, or continued interest in pursuing knowledge and sharing knowledge. And I'm glad it worked out very well for so many Ashoka and alumni from other colleges that we've had. So thanks again, Yuganshi. Looking forward to following your journey further ahead.
Thank you.